in most boarding schools, you have a matron who looks into, or a nurse who looks into physical health. When someone has a headache, they've got pills. But mental health is not just there. You don't have schools with counselors. So I think what normally happens is that
Thank you very much for joining us today for another episode of the Let's Talk Education Africa podcast. And I have the pleasure of speaking to Michelle Nkalamba from Malawi. She is going to tell us a bit about herself shortly, but we're going to be talking about mental health in education in Africa. And this is an important topic that we are exploring today. And we're hoping that at the end of the discussion, we will get to understand more, get some in-depth knowledge about the topic, but more importantly, understand how we as education stakeholders, wherever we are, whatever we do, how we can contribute to providing an excellent education for every child, including ensuring that children and young people in school are having their mental health and well-being catered for. Thank you very much for joining us, Michelle, and welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, Senyo, and thank you for the very warm welcome. I'm happy that I'll participate in this topic. I'm an avid and passionate person who's working in education, so I'm really honored to be here.
Yeah, thanks. You are in Malawi at the moment?
I'm in Malawi, the southern part of Malawi called Zomba, and the most beautiful. It's all green.
Nice. I wish I were there right now. You will be the first person we are talking to from Malawi, so it's exciting for me to get to talk to someone from another country and sharing some interest in education. So I'm very happy that you are able to join us. And we want to get into the discussion, but before then, it will be interesting for us to understand a bit more about your background, where you grew up and your experiences and what has brought you where you are now. So if you don't mind, you can kick us off by telling us a bit about yourself and your background.
Sure, but I do feel awkward being a counselor and a psychologist who usually listens to people, not talk about themselves, but I'll try my best. So Matero Michelle Nkalamba, and I was born in Lilongwe, which is the capital of Malawi, in a family of 8. I'm the last born. So I did my primary school education in local Malawi primary schools and went to secondary school. And then I was selected to university. Nothing exceptional about me, Senyo. I actually was not an A student. I was usually a B plus C student. The reason being, I was and still am an avid reader. So I would read everything out of my curriculum. And I would read so many books, just novels. And I would read my notes during the exam time. So I wasn't an A student, but still, I think that's what curved my academic career. So I'll start from where I am now. I'm a lecturer at the University of Malawi since 2005. I teach psychology, in particular clinical counseling, forensic psychology, and also mental health and health psychology. But I actually, I'll tell you what, Senyo, the interesting part is the teaching, not the marking. because I usually have big classes.
Yeah. So, I think the class would definitely relate to that.
Yeah, so I actually joined earlier on when I just graduated as an undergrad. I joined as a staff associate and secured the Bate Trust Scholarship to study for my master's in clinical psychology at Bangor University in the UK, in Wales, a very cold and miserable place. It was always raining. And, I mean, coming from a tropical country, apart from everything, the weather just really depressed me. So after I did my master's in clinical psychology, I then went further to pursue my PhD at Rhodes University in South Africa under the same Bate Trust Scholarship. That was from 2015 to 2020. I think this was the pivotal moment of my career because I think that's when I developed the passion to to go into mental health support, psychosocial support, and counseling, as opposed to just being focused on in the academia. So alongside that, I work with various client groups. I work obviously with students in higher education. I did a lot of counseling at the University of Malawi. I also work with staff in international organizations, especially those working in humanitarian contexts. What we normally do is to debrief them when they're going for a mission, and also check on them during the mission and also after the mission. So you can appreciate that, Senyo, if you look at, the humanitarian context now. We've got several, unfortunately, wars going on, and a lot of conflicts. And we have dedicated staff working in those contexts. So I do work with them, providing psychosocial support. I've also worked extensively with human rights activists, because they also face some certain challenges in their activism, and also survivors of violence. So really my work revolves around that. I deliver a lot of psychoeducational workshops, trainings, and webinars, because my approach is more preventative, where I believe that when one is armed with mental health literacy, it does help in coping, dealing with stress, and managing. So apart from that, really, I'm just ordinary, if not boring. I'm a bookworm. So I'm not one of those life of the party sort of people. If you give me a book, I'm good.
Yeah, that's an interesting mix. And I think I do like the intersection of your work in terms of being in academia, but also very much involved in the practice, providing support to people working in conflict areas, but also doing a lot of advocacy. So I think that you have really rich experience that cuts across, and you're not just stuck. Although you mentioned you're a bookworm, you're not just stuck with academia and reading, but you're doing lots of other interesting stuff around something you're very passionate about. So thanks for sharing about your background. I heard something new from what you're saying called mental health literacy. It's the first time I'm hearing a term like that. I'll be interested in you telling us about this, which would more be the focus of this discussion. But before we get to that, why is this area of education important to you? Why did you go into this? What brought you here?
Yeah, that's a good question. As you know, when you grow up in Africa, because our parents emphasize education. I know elsewhere in the world, but it's not just knowing how to read and write. Our parents very much want us to be the doctors, the engineers, the lawyers, because a parent wouldn't take you seriously in Africa when you say, you know what, I want to be an artist, I want to be a musician. But I also find that sometimes the inequalities in the education, private schools, but also the differences that a lot of students face, the challenges that a lot of learners face, and some of them are not captured. And the area that is neglected is mental health. The intersection between mental health and education is not really explored. So when I was listening to your podcast, a lot of interesting topics, technology, curriculum, but then do we understand our learners? Because our education is almost tailored sometimes for one type of learner. So it's not that the system is to blame, but it's just a lack of conversation around this topic. Do we understand that mental health issues can impact even children, and that impact that can have an impact on their education outcomes? I'll tell you what. As I've grown up, I've learned to understand that I could have, or I might have, some traits of ADHD, which is attention deficit disorder, because I very much like to be active, and my attention span, especially when I was young, was not the longest. Hence why I used to, read a lot of things. I needed to be stimulated. But to some teachers, that I was a nuisance. Right? Instead of understanding what was happening with me psychologically. So really, that's what brought me here. That can we understand what why mental health is important in education. What significance does it hold, especially in the context of Africa? Because we've got a lot of challenges that impact on us psychologically. You're talking of socioeconomic challenges. You're talking of poverty that directly impacts children. You're talking of environments that are unsafe. You're talking of limited resources. So I thought, okay, let's talk about this. Let's understand why mental health should be at the core of education.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I feel that it comes back to, for example, you looking at the conversations we've had on the podcast and feeling that there's something that is not captured there, but also the cultural context and how family wants to get this from education, and that is what they want, but do not often pay attention to the other factors, and how, as you mentioned with your own experience in school, your teachers felt that you were the nuisance and were not speaking to your needs, and the big focus is on the teaching and the learning. And this leads me to the next question, and especially within the African context, why do you think there's a strong case for supporting mental health in education in Africa? And I'm speaking about this in terms of having very limited resources and time, but very competing priorities as well. People are speaking about getting textbooks into schools, introducing technology, training teachers, and more often than not, things like guidance and counseling units in especially our public system, school system, are just not there at all. Why then, for example, if a policymaker or someone heading a school or education institution is listening, what is really the case for supporting mental health for pupils or teachers in education, especially in the context of Africa, where there are most likely many priorities but limited resources?
So I think that there are two questions in one. I'll start with the broader one. So, as you know, mental health in general is not a priority in African countries, where almost policies are there, but maybe not implemented because of resources. I'm saying this because obviously, most African countries are focusing their resources on physical health. For example, in Malawi, you're talking of HIV, tuberculosis, sexual reproductive health. So most of the funds go to physical or visible health. So mental health is put at the back burner. So even culturally, mental health is not really supported, even in our communities. There are a lot of cultural barriers, even just to seek mental health support. I always give this example, in Africa, where if you're being grumpy at home, if you've got a long face, your parents would look at you and say, you know what, you've had your fufu, or you've eaten your sima, you've eaten your gari. So why are you looking sad? Why are you looking worried? Yeah. Because they believe that if you have a roof on your head, if you've got food, what should you worry about? So let's start from there. That almost in every aspect of our lives, mental health is, put at the back burner, because I think we're struggling and grappling with the existential problems to focus on mental health issues. So to come to your question specifically, I think in education, this should be a concern, because there is a direct correlation between academic performance. Students who struggle mentally fail to concentrate, they can't retain information, and the learning process is very difficult for them. So can you I'll just mention a few problems that children face. I already talked about poverty. We're talking about a dire poverty here. We had Cyclone Freddy last year here in Malawi, where families lost. Hello, can you hear? Yeah, families lost everything. And you're talking of young children who experience the trauma of losing parents, of losing their homes. So there's trauma in childhood, and issues of abuse in children are also quite rampant. You have children who are also living with parents or family members with chronic illness, even children who live with chronic illness. So all those stresses cause anxiety, they cause stress. And if they go on like that, as they're, going up high in the education, in primary school, in secondary school, if they don't have the mechanisms to cope, they may start abusing substances, and then the problems spiral. So I really think it's an issue that we need to open dialogue about, normalize the discussion, encourage seeking help, and also for the teachers to understand that if they want to be successful in their teaching, if they want happy students, they have to pay attention to the holistic education, holistic development, both the mental, the physical, the social, the emotional, so that the child is educated holistically.
Yeah. I mean, that is an interesting reflection, and I like that you draw examples from happening, for example, with the cyclone in Malawi, and how much that would impact the children or the people involved. And what I get from that is that different contexts may have different circumstances that the education setting or curriculum or the country context should respond to, such that what is the mental health needs of children in Malawi may be different from that of maybe southern Nigeria, or maybe different place in South Africa, such that mental health is not about that one size fits all package. You say, okay, this is mental health check, and then you provide that to everyone. And I will be interested in you talking a bit more about this, but in the education setting, in terms of schools, institutions, NGOs, what could be some of the factors that in these education systems may be contributing to mental health issues? I mean, you've given an example of a natural disaster, but are there things we are overlooking in terms of what interactions or what happens in the school or work context, any education context, that may be contributing to mental health issues?
Yes, I think most education systems are not very inclusive. I know that's a very general and sweeping statement, but we could be better at providing special needs education, in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier on, understanding that learners are different, in particular focusing on mental health issues, understanding that learners come from different backgrounds. So because we're using systems that worked before, but perhaps now, because of the different challenges, because of how fast the world is changing, young people have access to social media, they can be cyberbullied. So we're not responding quick enough. So I think the major thing for me is making sure that education institutions pay attention to that specific area, that there are special needs and there are also mental health needs. So I talked about attention deficit disorder earlier on, which is where you have a child who can't maybe sit still in class. They need a different type of stimulation. They need to do things slower. And then at the end of the term, you always have, an exam period, an exam time where every student has to write a 2-hour paper at the same time, not giving the child with attention issues their own space to take the exam privately. This is very common, at least I know here in Malawi, where if they say that you're going to, the students are going to write exam, it's everyone writing at the same time. And these are national exams, but you have others who have maybe traits of autism, which is a very common developmental disorder. You have others who are just, dyslexic. So all those things. So I think for me, yes, there is a push for special needs education, but more specifically mental health. And even now, we're talking of trauma-informed organizations, because trauma has a different impact on a child's brain. It literally rewires their brain. It slows them down. So we have to also be responsive to the fact that we have a lot of trauma happening around us in our communities. As you mentioned, in Nigeria, there've been threats of terrorism. I mean, there have been students who've been kidnapped, even just living in that, that fear. We have a war now in South Sudan. and in other areas, the climate change. So there are different sorts of traumas that the education system now has to start, responding to. Even the way the curriculum is designed. For some learners, it can be, re-traumatizing if they're talking about issues that impacted on them. If they're traumatic issues, the learners can be re-traumatized and triggered. So it's really just paying attention and the word I use, mental health literacy, is exactly that, understanding what mental health is and how we're impacted.
Yeah. And following up on that and responding to these needs, do you think of this as heads of educational institutions developing initiatives and policies to respond to special needs or mental health issues or social and emotional well-being of students? Or you think that this is best, or this is better, a more top-down approach where there is a policy commitment and then the government through regulatory frameworks and financing is saying that this is what we want to do for every school or for every child or for every educational institution? Do you look at this as more bottom level, or this is a conversation and action that should flow from the top?
I think it's bottom up, because the stakeholders are the parents, and the parents also are the ones who understand the needs of their children. So for me, if you talk about policy, they have to first understand what's happening. They have to understand what really these children are facing, or the families that they come from. So I would say if there would be psychologically safe spaces where parents or teachers can talk about these things, talk about the issue of bullying, talk about what you're facing with your child at home. And this information can push, government can push those leaders to make policies that address these issues. So you also talked about guidance and counseling. For me, it's very obvious that every education institution should have this. In most boarding schools, you have a matron who looks into, or a nurse who looks into physical health. When someone has a headache, they've got pills. But mental health is not just there. You don't have schools with counselors. So I think what normally happens is that there's a disconnect between the parents, between the teachers, between what the students are facing and what the policymakers should be offering, should be providing to improve the education delivery.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think people would have a different perspective, but I like that you explained. And the key thing I get from what you're saying is the people who are closest to the child or the students are the people who, needs to be more involved as compared to someone who may be a bit out of that context or distant, may not understand the special needs, while still staying at what happens at the grassroots level, at the community or school level. One thing that influences all students, or most students, if they are not like A class students, is the stress that exams come with, the anxiety. Some will call this examination trauma. And this is not just but way before the exams, especially high-stakes standardized exams that will determine senior high school or college or university placement and things like that. When there is medicine, law, lots of these exams are around. The question is, how can we support students to overcome examination stress, that this call for changing the nature of the exam, preparing them better, because a lot of students go through this kind of exam stress. Some people are able to handle it better than the others, but there's also been very, very sad cases where students would actually go commit suicide because they did not get the grades that they were looking for, even after writing the exams and putting up their best. So this is a big area. I wanted to talk a bit more about how we can position examinations in a way that does not have to compound or activate mental health disorders or affect the well-being of students.
Yes. So I'll answer that from a different angle, because the examinations are just one example of how we stress our learners and our students to perform. It can be in sports, it can be even after they graduate, the expectations we have. So for me, I think it's what I mentioned about prioritizing mental health by building resilience earlier on, providing a holistic education. So I know a lot of curriculums have social skills, emotional skills embedded, but making sure that we're, doing more of that, building resilience, building a strong foundation for the learners to have a healthy mind. So you're talking about stress because it doesn't begin at the exam period. You find that these are poor coping mechanisms, perhaps, that the child has adopted on how they deal with pressure or how they see or define success. Maybe they have feelings of being perfect, feeling like if they fail, they don't have any self-worth. So all that is what mental health literacy involves. Learning, teaching the children to have a healthy self-concept of themselves, understanding, let them understand how they feel, mostly how to take care of themselves if they don't feel well. So if that is combined with, a very what I would call, for lack of a better word, a trauma-sensitive environment, or a mentally healthy environment where, the exams are not set in a way that they should punish the students, but in a way that you really want them to learn. Because for me, it's not just passing the exam, but what are they getting out of the exam? I think I explained earlier that I was that type of learner who wanted to know more. I was more curious about knowing things than passing the exam. I wasn't one who would memorize stuff to say, okay, I should pass it up. For me, it was more of understanding stuff. So also have a variety of ways to assess students so that it's not just about passing exam. They can demonstrate their abilities in different ways. But obviously, I'm preaching to the choir if someone who's in education is listening. But I think some of these things are easier written or said than done. But we should really start doing that giving room for different types of students, how they learn, or even what they want to become after they graduate.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. You said really important things, and the two most important things for me, listeners may pick different things, was how education systems and teaching and learning can build resilience among learners such that they are able to cope with high stress situations. That is one aspect. But also how we support them to see and define their success so that they do not attach or closely associate their self-worth with whether they pass their examinations or not, to understand that, exams is not all that matters in life, although it's important. But like you said, some head teachers or heads of school would disagree, because it all boils down to the exams and how well your students have performed, especially the private sector where your resources work does a lot of the marketing. But it's very important to find the balance. And moving on from here, I feel that you mentioned parents earlier, but when children are in the school setting, the teacher is the central person in their lives. And so I think it's important in this discussion for us to look at, especially for teachers who may be listening and in hard-to-reach communities or in certain contexts where mental well-being is not part of the school culture, is not part of the curriculum, but the teacher is listening, or someone feel like, what can I do? How do you think teachers can contribute to the mental well-being of their learners, especially in contexts where it's not system-led, it's not ingrained as part of the school culture or practice?
This is a challenging one because, as we know, the teacher-student ratio in most African countries is, appallingly overwhelming. So on the one hand, I think the teachers play a central role because they interact with the learners most of the time. On the other hand, they cannot afford to pay attention to every, learner's needs in that sense. Hence, the having a guidance counselor. But what we can do is to support them, at least to identify the mental health issues that a learner is having, just training them and giving them the resources that they can use initially to understand what's going on with a specific learner. So educators should know the signs of distress, for example, and create that sort of supportive classroom. But there are also other things such as when a child experiences trauma. So you can have a student who is performing well, and then the next semester they're totally a different person because of the trauma they experienced. Maybe during holiday, they lost a parent, they lost a sister, or they've been through an accident. And teachers should be able to pick that up. So providing them with the support, the knowledge, and at the same time, we're not saying teachers are counselors. They should be able to signpost to say, I'm having challenges with this learner. I suspect this, and then signpost them to further care, whether on the education institution or outside the institution. So I think they do play a role. At the same time, they shouldn't be burdened.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I like how you ended about the fact that, we want the teacher to do this, but at the same time, it's not like they become the person who listens, who investigates, who gives counseling, but they need to operate within that support system where they are playing a role or catalyzing that difference for their students. And you've had a lot of experience in this sector, and you are an advocate for promoting mental health, especially in the education setting. If you were on the decision-making table, say you were appointed the Minister of Education in Malawi, or you were working on a policy document, or you just have that influence and power to make certain big changes, what would be some of the top priorities that you would want to look at if you had the power to make decisions that would hold in the education setting?
I think the first thing is to define our culture of well-being, mental health, because it's not just about the school setting, it's also in the communities. So define the culture of mental health, speak more about mental health. And to start with, our education curriculum should also be very explicit, mentioning mental health, mentioning issues about suicide, about depression. As I mentioned, now we have mental health in the curriculum, yes, but they could do more. More can be done to actually hone in the issue so that the learners should understand, the parents should understand what mental health really is about. I talked about coping skills, but also just to increase emotional intelligence, to develop self-awareness. So make that sort of curriculum that explicitly prioritizes mental health. Yeah. And the other thing is the school cultures, supportive school cultures. You mentioned about private schools. Yes, they are doing great in educating our young ones, because in our context, we also have quite a lot of private schools that are doing well. But at some point, it becomes about how many students have we passed, and even worse, at the expense of the students' mental health. All right. There is a lot of evidence of students being taught for hours on end. Weekends they're studying, holidays they're studying, not even room for the learner to rest or to have hobbies, because the emphasis is on, we need to get this much A's, we need to get this much students to the university, so that next time it's a selling point for the school. I don't think that's a healthy culture. It should be a culture that prioritizes well-being, balance, and also focusing on a holistic development of our children, because education is important, and I think that approach looks at everyone as if they're going to be an academic. Sometimes people need education to get to their dreams, whether they want to be a musician, whether they want to start their own business. So I think there should be that culture that prioritizes mental health. And learners shouldn't be unnecessarily stressed just because you want to have the numbers for marketing the private institution.
Yeah. I mean, what you said that stood out to me is the fact that we shouldn't be looking at learners performing high academically at the expense of their mental health. And it relates back to like sad experiences of people just performing very high but being very unhappy, and cases where someone gets all A's but get a B in one subject and they are very upset, and someone who gets maybe C's or B's is very happy and it's okay with their grades. But I think that, I mean, it's really important to, I mean, maintain high standards, encourage them to perform better, but also draw the line and find the balance to the extent to which that gives them unnecessary pressure and comes at the expense of their mental health well-being. And I would say thanks a lot for sharing very insightful comments, and your analysis are top notch. And I would say that it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I've learned some interesting things from what you are saying. And moving on from this discussion, it really comes back to me as someone working in education to rethink personally about what are some of my actions or the actions of my organization that may not be supporting mental health well-being. So what I really want to end on is not just about how curriculums are not inclusive and are not addressing these issues, but how you and I and everyone who is listening to this podcast can begin to reflect and think about what can I do in my context to promote the mental health and well-being of the people that I'm working with. So those are my last reflections. I'll come back to you for your last words, and then we will call it a day.
I think my last reflections come from my years of experience, not only in the academia in higher education, but as I mentioned, that I also work with professionals. These are experts working in humanitarian contexts, or human rights and human rights activists. And what I've consistently found is that we carry good or bad coping mechanisms, and they really start at a young age. So I'm emphasizing that we should prioritize holistic education. The child should understand how to take care of themselves. They should understand their emotions, be self-aware, prioritize their own well-being over everything. Because with mental health, you can never be productive if you have poor mental health. You have to be mindful of whatever you're doing is impacting on your well-being. So I would say open the conversation, have empathy, create an environment where mental health issues can be expressed. Because there's in the education space, some may feel that if I say that I'm depressed, I'll look like I'm not competent or I'll look lazy. But let's just normalize this discussion in our young ones. They should know how to rest. They shouldn't feel pressured to resort to dangerous coping mechanisms like substance abuse because they're afraid to speak up. So that's my message, that let's focus on holistic development of our children. Mental, psychological, emotional well-being is equally important for intellectual growth.
Yeah, let's focus on holistic development and create an enabling environment for some of these discussions void of the usual stereotypes. Before I let you go, if anyone is, this conversation has piqued someone's interest, they want to read more, there's an article, there's a book, there's a publication. Is there any resource that you particularly would be happy to refer anyone to or to share if someone wants to understand more as a beginner?
Well, I would say any resources on mental health literacy, especially on children. There's a study, actually there's an institution at University of Buffalo in New York. They're doing research on trauma as it impacts children. So it's very interesting because it really explores, even them into adulthood. You find that trauma that happens in childhood can impact you up to adulthood if it's not addressed. So look into anything that talks about the impact of trauma in children. It literally changes your brain, your learning pattern, how you recall information. So anything about trauma in children, there's a popular study on childhood adversity and trauma. So that's a way to start, because these things are not appreciated more. It's as if because they're not visible, you can't see emotional pain. So I'd say a place to start is just reading about how trauma impacts on children, and see how it can literally change the behavior. Even an intelligent child can totally change because of trauma.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for sharing on that. And to add to what you said, I think that there's a growing number of podcasts. Some are very specialized on specific topics. I mean, we are looking at education generally on the African continent, but if someone is very interested in learning more, there should be some really good podcasts that are focused on mental health being, both in the education sector and also outside that sector as well. So on this note, thank you so much for making time for this really interesting conversation, and we would stay in touch and hope to continue this conversation and look at it from another perspective another time.
Thank you so much, Senyo. I'm so happy that I was invited here, and looking forward to listening to more of the topics on your podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And audience, thank you so much for staying with us and doing the listening. We'd encourage you to share the conversation and follow us on our social media platforms. Until the next episode, this is the Let's Talk Education Africa podcast. Thank you for listening.